Hello, I'm Louis Yanis with WealthNet Investments. I'm the founder of WealthNet Investments, and this is Market Coffee Talk, where I talk about various things about making smart financial choices and doing well with your money, growing your money, preserving your money. And today, I want to answer some questions with regard to how well is economic growth? How are we doing right now? There's been a lot of questions about that lately. And I thought maybe we'd look at some of the facts that we can observe and to kind of maybe let you come up with your own conclusions about it. And I might give you a little bit of my 2 cents as well. This is live, by the way, and you can talk to me if you are jumping on this. Go ahead and jump on and you can answer some questions. So I'd like to know from you, are we doing well? Are we doing well in the economy? And I'm going to go ahead and show that. Are we doing well right now? I guess one of the questions that we have to really determine is what does it mean to be doing well? Some people think it has to do with how many jobs are created. Some people think it has to do with what the unemployment rate is. Other people think it has to do with growth, or some people think it might have to do with wages. Some people think it has to do with none of those economic numbers. It has to do more about what is our values as a society, and we can really get in the weeds with this. But for today's discussion, I want to talk about really more about economic growth and employment, those two factors. I want to talk about where we are, what we've been through, where we stand right now, just at a high level. And then I want to talk a little bit about some interesting articles that I read and some key points that were brought up, in particular by Leanne Saunders from Charles Schwab. She's a strategist there. I thought had some pretty good insights in her last report. So first, I want to talk a little bit about economic growth. I mean, today, and I'm just going to share my screen a little bit. Today, we had actually a lot of news. We had our employment number news come out, and I'm looking right now at a kind of what the different takes were on it. And Biden came out, and Biden said, "Hey, we have had historic progress in the economy on the number of jobs that are growing." And he really was touting about how great economic growth was and how strong these numbers were. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported 559,000 new jobs were added to the economy in May. Now I know a lot of the economists were forecasting more like 675,000 coming into the economy. If you look at the numbers of what we would have to grow just to kind of get back to where we were by the end of the year, according to Leanne Saunders, we would have to have over 1 million jobs reported each time, right? And we're only, right now, we're at half of that amount, maybe 50 to 60% of that amount. So based on that projection, it doesn't look like we're going to be at the level we were prior to the pandemic when Trump was in office. So it looks like we're going to be falling short of that. So when I thought, well, that's only one metric, but what about all the other metrics? I mean, the stock market itself is at new highs right now, actually. And if that's the case, the stock market, it's anticipating a big rally. So does that mean that the economy is actually at that level? Or is the stock market ahead of itself? Well, one of the things I want to look at is just the economic growth numbers and just say, okay, well, let's look at the long-term economic growth. And if we look at that long-term economic growth, what does that look like? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here real quick. I need to get that set up. Sorry, I don't have it set up right away. And I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to share a window for you. I'm just going to share my entire screen. Okay. So now you should see my screen, and we're going to turn it onto this cool graphic here that I found. Okay. This is an article that I thought was really, really interesting. This was a BBC article, and it really shows a long-term growth pattern. And if you look at the growth rates, the GDP as a percentage change on the previous quarter during the Obama administration, you could see that here during the Trump administration. And then I'm going to move forward to the Biden administration so we can kind of see. So during the Obama administration, we averaged 2.3% compounded growth in the economy, which over a very long period of time is not as good as it was before. Under the Trump administration, it was slightly better, 2.5%. But you could see that that 2.5% includes a huge down number that was due to an exogenous event from the pandemic. And notice that things quickly rebounded back up before Biden came in. So we saw this big drop, big rise. And those numbers, that 2.5% growth number, which was stronger than the Obama administration growth numbers, if you take out that big down from the pandemic, it was significantly higher than the Obama administration. However, it's really important, I think, to understand that presidents alone don't make up how the growth of the economy is going to be, as you probably know. It's only one factor, and it also takes a long time for policies that a president can have an impact on to actually affect the real economy. So I think I would argue that we put too much emphasis on attributing economic growth to a particular president. It does take time for policy to filter its way through. So when a president first comes in, there's very little that actually happens right away. And then much of what happens from the animal spirits of the economy and the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has a much bigger immediate impact. So I wanted to show you this other chart I thought was very interesting. If you look at this, this is the U.S. economic growth since 1950. This shows the GDP percent change on the previous quarter. And if you go back to the 1950s, I mean, look how much higher our growth was, around the 10% area, just under 10%. And it's been over the decades going down, 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 down. So in the United States, the growth rate has been steadily becoming lower and lower as we've become more of a developed economy, as we've created more, basically our productivity has, had been at different levels, but our growth rate has been going down. But if you look at what happened with the pandemic, this is an enormous event that we're looking at. I want everybody to see how big this really was. Look at the percent change there compared to that going all the way back to the 1950s. This is enormous. This is enormous, and it really should be understood. So tell me, do you think we're doing well? Well, we had a huge snapback, right? This exogenous event snapped back very rapidly. So that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. Now, today, Biden came out again, and he said, look, everything is, we're just really on top of things. Things are moving forward and going up higher, and we're growing. And he spouted some numbers. I couldn't believe he actually framed it the way he did. He was saying he was using numbers versus last year coming off an extreme low. And he was talking about the job growth coming off that extreme low, almost like patting himself on the back saying, look what we did. Look what my policies did. The reality is we were snapping back already, right? And we came off a huge, huge low. So let's just look at the reality of this. This right here, I'm now looking at one of our databases. This is the U.S. unemployment rate. So the higher this number is, the more people are unemployed. So you can see this on the unemployment rate really bounced up. And then it immediately started coming down. Well, he was making comparisons off of the low, right? Off of the low from the pandemic. Is that an honest way to be thinking about things? Is that really something that you could attribute to his policies? Another thing that we could attribute, let's just back up a little bit. Almost everybody agrees that a big reason why we're seeing the snapback is because the vaccines came in, right? I'm going to have to, that's my phone, and I'm not going to take that. Sorry. we know a lot of the reason why this economic growth came back is because we had the vaccines. The vaccines were shown to be very effective, and that really helped. Now, if you've been following the, how did these vaccines come into existence? Did these vaccines come out of nowhere? What was the policy that made this happen? Well, I would argue it was, I think the facts really show this, that basically the policies that were related to Operation Warp Speed, which were enacted and put together by Trump's administration, there was a huge collaboration between the private sector, which had been working on DNA sequencing and DNA-related therapies for a long, long time. So we've been stuffing this big cannon with DNA-related technologies, right, in the private sector. And then the Trump administration came in and said, look, we need to move fast. We have the ability to develop these vaccines. Let's do it quickly. And we broke a bunch of rules that normally take things a long time to pass so that things can move very quickly. And so that was already in motion. That was being launched regardless of who was the president, right? So I think it's a little unfair for the Biden administration to attribute that to his own policies. In fact, I would argue that he kind of was late in doing that. There was a lot of political things. So here's the thing. I'm not trying to be partisan here. Here's something that I am strongly believe. When I think about politics and when I think about how an investor should be thinking about politics, I've come up with a philosophy that I really, really stand by, and I want to tell you a little bit about that. I really think that there are three ways that investors should think about politics. Forget about your personal beliefs and all that, but as an investor, and when I'm talking to clients, I really focus in on these things. Number one is politics is all about gaining and retaining power. So that's the basic tenet. Politics is about gaining and retaining power. So what that means is that good politicians who gain power and retain power tend to deal with things that are going to keep power, right? They're going to deal with what they need to do to get that power. Now, does that mean that they always tell the truth? I would argue by definition that because of that they will not and will tell lies. All politicians tell lies. That's one of my basic tenets. Now, you might say, well, oh my gosh, you're so skeptical. Well, there was a time when I wasn't so skeptical, but over time, the evidence is clear that I found, and I have been warned actually by people that were more wise than me throughout the years that was the case. And now I'm a full believer in that by definition, politicians will lie. Politicians can and will lie. That's my second tenet. And they will do it on a regular basis in order to achieve their power objectives. Okay. So number three, given that we know that as investors, what we care about is truth, what is really happening. So when we listen to politicians, we should only be looking for the following. We should be looking for, number one, what are they really actually doing right now? What is really being done? That means you have to look at the data. You have to stop listening to what they're saying and look at what they're doing. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, we have to say, what are the things that they're likely to do given their incentives? Given the politicians' incentives, and that goes for Congress, that goes for the local economies, goes all the way up to the president. What are their likely incentives, and what does that mean that they're likely to do? So the third thing is this: given that, how will these likely actions and known actions likely affect money and markets? That is it. So when I'm dealing with politics, if you hear me talking about politics with you, that's the lens I'm looking through. I'm not looking at the lenses like, oh, Louis, you are very partisan. No, what I'm saying is that as my job as an investment manager, as a wealth manager, looking out for the best interest of our clients, we have to look at it from this lens. And sometimes it might seem a little partisan, but it's not. So what I'm trying to say here is that we have and will continue to be lied to. And we must look at the data, and we must look at their incentives and what are they likely to do. So right now, I want to make the point about how are we doing. The question is, how are we doing? Well, the unemployment rate hit this massive uptrend, right? I mean, massive high. And we've been coming down, and we know that that's been coming down steadily, right? In fact, it came down really the most percent increase when Trump was still in office, even with all the chaos that was going on, Black Lives Matter and all this nuts stuff, people breaking stuff, it was still going on. So is it fair to attribute this growth pattern that we're seeing to Biden? I would say partially yes, but mostly no. And then the other thing I would say is, have we really grown that much? Well, as you can see in this chart here, we still have not gone back to the level that we were before. Okay, so we have not fully recovered. We are going to, and I have full optimism that we will. And this was going to happen regardless of what policies were put in place. I would argue, and we could go into lots of other charts, that the growth rates and the employment has been slowed down by policy because we've seen some things. Now I want to kind of move into some of the other discussion about what we've been seeing in the economy. So moving back to how well have we done? I had mentioned that Lisanne Saunders from Charles Schwab said that, hey, look, we need to have like $1 million reports of jobs coming in, or not $1 million, million jobs coming in for us to say, hey, look, we are actually making, we're back to where we were. We're below that, right? And then the other data shows that there's a lot of employment checks that are being written, unemployment checks that are being written to people, and they are not going to end until September. So most of the jobs that you've seen starting to come back that are not coming back, right? Most of the jobs that are having a hard time picking back up are the lower end wage jobs, okay? And the reason why that's the case is because many people, my hypothesis is that many people are just saying, look, I'm going to get paid more to just not work than I am if I go back to work. And so I'm just not going to work. So I would argue that the employment has been actually muted because of the policies that are taking place. And I would also argue that we have increased our debt to the point, and if you look at the policies that are actually out on the table now, we're looking at massive debt increases. So if you don't own gold, if you don't own things that are going to be benefiting from a lower dollar, I think that would be irrational to me. Like if you had no exposure, no investment to assets that are going to do well in that lower dollar environment, then maybe you're out of sync with what's going on. So anyhow, so how are we doing? Are we really doing that well? I would say, thank God we're improving. Thank God we have I'm very optimistic. But I would also caution to keep in mind that politicians are going to lie to you, and they're going to frame things in a way to make them look good. But to believe that they're attributed to their policies would be false in many cases. And we could talk even more and more. I've been on for about 18 minutes, and I don't want to pound a dead horse. Is that a saying? Is that a thing? But I do want to make the point that this is something that's really happening, and that we have to be smart. What we have to do is we have to say, look, we don't want to be so partisan that we don't see the facts. And I think I might have mentioned this before, but I'm going to mention this again. There have been studies on groupthink that are just absolutely amazing. One of them that really struck me is it was a study done where this person in a big classroom had a sign that had 3 lines, 2 very big lines and 1 small line. And everybody in the room prior to this question, okay, was told, pick the long line and say that it's the short line, except for one person, right? Only one person wasn't in on it. And so the guy at the front of the room says, which line is the shortest? Everybody in the room said it was one of the long ones. And the guy who didn't have that was like, he could clearly see which one was shorter, but everybody was saying it was a long one. That was the shortest one. And so what did he do? He went, he said the shortest one was, the longest one was the shortest one. He basically defied what he saw with his own 2 eyes. Why? Because everybody around him was telling you something, right? Now, I would argue that the media, and we all know it's partisan. There's partisan on both sides, right? They're trying to pound in certain things that may not be true, I didn't used to be so skeptical, but I am skeptical now. And if you're not skeptical, that's on you. Anyway, I hope you guys are doing well. And I know you're doing well. Things are just really getting better. And I don't want to be negative, but I also want us to understand and attribute success to where success should be. You know who the real success is? The success is in us. It's in us having the right values, in us making the right investment choices. It's in us doing the right thing for our family, for our jobs, and our economy in a way where we're also benefiting the whole society. So I think if we have that nice blend where our values are in the right spot, we can't let the politicians divide us. We have to be the good people that we are and remember that, and I'm going to sound a little nationalist, but America is a wonderful place to live. And I'm glad that we live here. And since we just passed Memorial Day, I want to thank everybody who served our great nation. And here's to some great times ahead. And if you guys ever need anything, want to talk at all, just let us know. You can always get a hold of us at wealthnetinvest.com. And be sure to like and subscribe. Join my Facebook, my YouTube. You can go to our website, subscribe to our newsletter at wealthnetinvest.com. Otherwise, have a great and wonderful day.